Pancreatic cancer carries a 5-year survival rate of roughly 12%. And in my 2.5 decades operating on digestive cancers, the pattern I see most often is not genetics, not smoking, not family history. It is the kitchen. And the food most silently connected to that risk is almost certainly sitting in your refrigerator right now, waiting to be reheated for the second time. The second time heat touches it, that food is no longer the same food at a molecular level. When certain everyday ingredients are reheated, they undergo chemical reactions that generate compounds classified as probable or known carcinogens by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. The pancreas, which has no early warning system, no pain signal, no visible symptom in its early stages, is downstream of everything you eat. What you have been doing carefully, practically, responsibly, finishing leftovers, not wasting food, being sensible, may have been quietly working against the organ least equipped to tell you so. Nobody told you. That is the part nobody ever says out loud. And there is a second question I want you to hold until we reach the end of this video. Whether what has accumulated over years of reheating can be interrupted, or whether that window has already closed. My name is Dr. Jennifer Ashton. I am a surgical oncologist specializing in pancreatic and upper digestive tract cancers, with over 25 years operating on the consequences of what we eat. In the next several minutes, I will name 5 specific foods, explain the exact chemical reason each one becomes dangerous the second time heat touches it, and give you 3 changes you can make in your kitchen tonight. Not next week, tonight. Because the organ we are talking about does not give you a second conversation. Heat does not simply warm food the second time you apply it. That is the part nobody explains. The food sitting in your refrigerator right now, the portion you set aside because throwing it out felt wasteful, looks identical to what you cooked yesterday. It smells the same. It will taste roughly the same. But at a molecular level, something has already begun happening to it. And the second time heat touches it, that process accelerates in ways that have nothing to do with how the food looks or smells or whether it was stored correctly. A cast iron pan left wet overnight does not announce what is happening to it. The oxidation begins the moment moisture meets metal, invisible, silent, accumulating in microscopic layers that build on each other every time the same conditions repeat. You do not see the rust forming. You see the damage weeks later, when it has already gone deep. The chemistry running through certain reheated foods works on the same quiet principle. The compounds do not announce themselves. They have no color, no taste, no warning smell. They form, they accumulate, and the body absorbs them through the same gastrointestinal tract that feeds every organ downstream, including the pancreas, which has no early alarm system, no pain signal in its early stages, and no way to tell you what has been arriving in its vicinity for the past several years. When starchy foods, preserved proteins, and nitrate-rich vegetables are subjected to high heat a second time, they generate specific carcinogenic byproducts. Acrylamide, a compound that disrupts cellular DNA replication and is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a Group 2A probable human carcinogen. Nitrosamines, nitrogen-based compounds formed when preserved proteins are reheated and directly linked to pancreatic ductal cell damage. And reactive aldehydes, cell toxins released from oxidized fats that form chemical bonds with DNA strands and interrupt normal cellular replication. None of these compounds are filtered effectively by the pancreas before they enter systemic circulation. Every time you reheated the same foods this past year, the practical ones, the ones you saved because wasting food made no sense, this chemistry was running in your kitchen without a single visible sign. The 5 foods connected to these mechanisms are not unusual. They are not specialty ingredients or exotic items. They are the foods in your refrigerator right now, the ones you reheated last week, and the ones most likely sitting on the shelf behind you at this exact moment. Rice has one of the most innocent reputations of any food in the human diet. Bland, simple, filling, it is the base of meals in virtually every culture on Earth, and the idea that leftover rice could carry cancer risk feels, on its face, almost absurd. But the chemistry that activates when cooked rice is cooled, stored, and then reheated operates completely independently of how the rice looks or smells, and it has nothing to do with being careless in the kitchen. When cooked rice cools, Bacillus cereus spores, which survive the initial cooking process, begin to multiply. On reheating, these spores produce a heat-stable toxin called cereulide that standard reheating temperatures cannot destroy. That is the food safety concern most people have at least partially heard of. The deeper carcinogenic issue is separate and less discussed. During high-heat reheating of rice, the Maillard reaction, the same browning process that creates flavor in cooked food, generates heterocyclic amines, or HCAs, compounds that food chemistry research and oncology journals have connected to increased colorectal and pancreatic cancer risk through direct mutagenic action on gastrointestinal epithelial cells, the cells lining the digestive tract that interface directly with everything you eat. The IARC classifies certain HCAs in Group 2A, meaning the evidence for human carcinogenicity is substantial enough to warrant that designation even without a definitive causal proof. Worth noting carefully here, rice reheated on the same day, brought quickly to full internal temperature, carries meaningfully lower risk than rice stored overnight and reheated at lower temperatures over extended time. The compounding concern is not one bowl. It is the pattern, years of the same storage and reheating cycle, producing the same compounds, delivering the same chemical exposure to the same digestive tissue repeatedly. Rice is the most quietly dangerous item on this list, precisely because nothing about it suggests danger. And what comes next is a food most people reheat specifically because they believe the second round of cooking makes it safer, not more chemically complex. Every morning in millions of kitchens, leftover sausage is slid into a pan, bacon from yesterday is reheated on medium heat, deli cuts are warmed through before being added to a sandwich. The instinct driving this habit is rational. A second round of cooking kills bacteria, eliminates contamination risk, makes the food safer. I want you to set that instinct aside for a moment and look at what the heat is actually building. Nitrates and nitrites are used as preservatives in processed and cured meats. They extend shelf life, maintain color, and inhibit bacterial growth. Under high heat, in the presence of amino acids from the meat's own protein structure, these nitrites convert to N-nitroso compounds, more commonly called nitrosamines. Nitrosamines are IARC Group 2A probable carcinogens with a documented biological pathway to pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, the most common and most lethal form of pancreatic cancer, through oxidative stress and direct DNA alkylation in pancreatic acinar cells, the cells responsible for producing digestive enzymes that enter the pancreatic duct. Epidemiological data from IARC's processed meat classifications, which place processed meat itself in Group 1, the same category as tobacco, and mechanistic research from oncology journals examining nitrosamine pathways make this connection one of the more robustly supported dietary cancer risk links in current research. The risk is not one morning's bacon. The risk is the accumulated nitrosamine load from years of repeated reheating in a body over 60 whose cellular repair mechanisms are operating at significantly reduced efficiency compared to the same body at 40. The cellular damage does not reset between meals. Before we move forward, I want to ask you something directly. How many mornings this week have you reheated bacon, sausage, or deli meat? Not whether you did it, how many times? Hold that number in your mind while we continue, because the answer matters more than most people realize. What comes next is the item that, in my 25 years of surgical oncology practice, generates more genuine disbelief than anything else on this list, because it is the food people have been deliberately reheating in the belief that it was protecting them. If you have been reheating spinach, kale, or chard because you understood that leafy greens support cellular health, you were applying correct nutritional science to the wrong version of the food. The chemistry that makes spinach beneficial in its fresh or freshly cooked state is not the chemistry present in spinach that has been cooled, stored, and returned to heat. Spinach carries among the highest dietary nitrate concentrations of any commonly eaten vegetable. During cooling and refrigerated storage, bacterial activity drives a conversion process. Nitrates transform into nitrites within the stored cooked greens. This is not spoilage. The greens look fine, smell fine, and will taste fine. The conversion is chemical, not sensory. When those nitrite-loaded greens are reheated, they enter the same nitrosamine-forming pathway as processed meats, generating carcinogenic N-nitroso compounds that gastroenterology and food safety research, including European Food Safety Authority studies and IARC's dietary nitrite classifications, associate with increased gastric and pancreatic cancer risk through the same ductal epithelial damage mechanism described in the previous item. This is the answer to the question I raised at the beginning of this video. The food most dangerous to reheat is not the one that looks dangerous. It is the one you reheated specifically because you believed it was the healthiest option in your kitchen. I think about Margaret, a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher who had developed a Sunday routine she was genuinely proud of. Cooking large batches of spinach at the start of each week, storing portions, reheating them daily because she had read that leafy greens supported cellular health and she was trying to do everything right. Her pancreatic cancer was found at a routine scan she had nearly rescheduled. What made the diagnosis land so heavily was not the diagnosis itself. It was what her gastroenterologist identified as a contributing pattern of repeated dietary exposure. The habit she had been most proud of was the one she had never once questioned. The chemical conversion running through those stored and reheated greens had been happening in her kitchen for years, quietly, every time the second time heat touched them. The next item on this list shifts the focus from the food itself to the method, because the danger in item 4 is not what the food is. It is what the cooking oil becomes when heat reaches it for the second time. The logic seems sound. You reheated the stir-fry in the same oil you used to cook it originally. Or you warmed the leftover fried chicken in a pan with a little oil added because that is how it was cooked the first time and it worked perfectly. The cooking method that produced the food the first time should be safe to repeat. That logic is precisely what makes this the most mechanically damaging reheating habit on this list. Polyunsaturated fats present in common cooking oils, sunflower oil, corn oil, standard vegetable blends, undergo lipid peroxidation when subjected to high heat. On a second heating, this oxidation process accelerates, generating reactive aldehydes, specifically 4-hydroxynonenal, abbreviated 4-HNE, and malone dialdehyde, or MDA. These are not trace contaminants. They are potent cellular toxins with direct genotoxic activity, meaning they form DNA adducts, which are chemical bonds that attach directly to DNA strands and physically disrupt their ability to replicate correctly. Lipid chemistry and food oxidation research from European food safety institutions, aldehyde toxicology studies, and oncology research examining oxidative DNA damage all document the link between repeated aldehyde exposure and colorectal and pancreatic cancer promotion. I want to pause here for a moment, because this particular item takes me back to a specific afternoon in postoperative care. A patient in his early 70s, recovering from a pancreatic resection, a surgery that removes part of the pancreas, turned to me while I was reviewing his chart and asked, very quietly, why nobody had warned him. Not angrily, genuinely bewildered. He had never heard the words lipid peroxidation in his life. He had no reason to. The kitchen and the operating table exist in entirely separate conversations in most of medicine, and I did not have a good answer for him that afternoon. That question is part of why this conversation exists. Worth being clear about the specific risk here. Reheating fried food in an oven or air fryer without adding oil significantly reduces aldehyde formation. The danger is specific to stovetop refrying, to the second time oil reaches frying temperature. Change the method. Interrupt the mechanism. Item 5 is the most universally reheated food in senior households across every demographic and every income level, and the one most likely to have appeared in your kitchen multiple times already this week. Leftover potatoes are the most practical food in existence. They keep well, reheat easily, adapt to whatever meal they are added to, and represent straightforward economy in a kitchen where food cost matters. There is nothing about a reheated potato that signals chemical complexity. And yet the process that begins the moment a cooked potato cools and waits to be heated again is one of the most documented dietary carcinogen pathways in food science. Starchy foods, including potatoes, generate acrylamide, a compound the IARC classifies as Group 2A probable human carcinogen, through the Maillard reaction when subjected to dry, high heat. Roasting, microwaving, pan-frying, all three produce acrylamide in reheated starchy foods, and the concentrations increase with each heat exposure the food undergoes. Acrylamide's mechanism of action involves conversion to glycitamide inside the body, which then forms adducts with DNA, chemically bonding to DNA strands in tissues with high cellular turnover rates, including pancreatic ductal cells and gastrointestinal epithelium, disrupting normal replication in cells that divide frequently and therefore carry elevated mutation risk. Food chemistry research, IARC's own Group 2A classification documents, and epidemiological studies from oncology journals examining dietary acrylamide intake and pancreatic cancer risk all point toward the same compounding concern. Boiling or steaming potatoes produces significantly lower acrylamide concentrations than dry heat methods, and eating freshly cooked potatoes eliminates the secondary heat exposure entirely. The mechanism depends on the second round of dry heat. Remove that, and the primary acrylamide-generating pathway is interrupted before it begins. Across all 5 of these foods, rice, processed meat, leafy greens, fried food, potatoes, the common thread is never the food itself. It is the second time heat touches it. That is where the chemistry changes, where the carcinogenic compounds form, where the accumulation begins. And that pattern is one you have had the power to interrupt the entire time. What that interruption looks like in a real kitchen tonight is exactly what comes next. Some of you are sitting with a version of the same thought right now. I have been reheating food my entire adult life. My parents did it, my grandparents did it, I have been doing it for 40 years, and I am still here. That is not denial. That is a completely rational observation, and I want to address it directly rather than dismiss it. The reason you are still here is not that the chemistry described in the previous chapter was wrong. It is that cancer from repeated dietary carcinogen exposure is not an event. It is a threshold. The body carries cellular repair mechanisms specifically designed to manage low-level DNA damage, and for most of your adult life, those mechanisms were efficient enough to address the exposure before it accumulated past the point of consequence. What changes at 60 is not the food. It is the repair system. The same acrylamide load, the same nitrosamine exposure, the same aldehyde accumulation that your body managed quietly at 40 begins arriving in a system whose repair capacity has measurably declined. The exposures that were manageable are now approaching a threshold those mechanisms can no longer reliably correct. In my surgical practice, I have never operated on a patient whose cancer had a single dietary cause. What I have seen consistently is patients whose cumulative exposure history, years of small repeated inputs, crossed a threshold their aging cellular repair systems could no longer hold. You did not do something reckless. You did what made complete practical and financial sense with the information available to you. That information has now changed. The 3 changes that cost nothing and can begin in your kitchen tonight, one of which requires throwing absolutely nothing away, are in the next chapter. What you carry out of this video is something most people will go their entire lives without knowing. The specific chemical reason 5 common foods become carcinogenically different the second time heat touches them. That is not a burden. It is a precise advantage, and it starts working for you tonight. The first thing to do is straightforward. Open your refrigerator and identify which of the five, rice, processed meat, leafy greens, fried food, leftover potatoes, are sitting there right now. You do not need to throw anything away. You need to make one decision. Whichever food you would have reheated tomorrow, cook that food fresh instead. One food, one change. A pattern that may have been running in your kitchen for years without resistance ends with a single decision made tonight. The second change is specifically for fried food. If leftover fried chicken, stir-fry, or pan-fried vegetables are in your refrigerator, do not return them to a stovetop pan with oil. Use an oven or air fryer at moderate temperature. The aldehyde formation that makes reheated fried food dangerous is specific to the second time oil reaches frying temperature. Remove the oil from the reheating process, and you interrupt the mechanism entirely. No cost, no new equipment required if you already own either appliance. The third change is for leafy greens only. From tonight forward, cook only what will be eaten at that meal. Spinach, kale, chard, buy them fresh, store them raw, cook only the portion for that sitting. The nitrate to nitrite conversion that creates the carcinogenic pathway begins during the cooling and storage phase, before reheating even happens. Remove the storage window and there is no conversion to worry about. Changing even one of these three things tonight breaks a pattern that has likely been running in your kitchen for years without ever being examined. That is not a minor thing. And the question I raised at the start of this video, whether the accumulation from years of this chemistry can be interrupted, deserves a real answer, which is coming in the next 60 seconds. What this video established across 5 very common foods is that the carcinogenic risk from kitchen reheating habits is not about contamination or carelessness. Reheated rice generates heterocyclic amines through the Maillard reaction, DNA-damaging compounds with a documented pathway to gastrointestinal and pancreatic cancer risk. Reheated processed meat produces nitrosamines, nitrogen compounds that directly damage pancreatic ductal cells through DNA alkylation. Reheated leafy greens undergo the same nitrosamine-forming pathway as preserved meats, through nitrate to nitrite conversion during storage. Reheated fried food generates reactive aldehydes, 4-HNE and MDA, that form DNA adducts and disrupt cellular replication in digestive tissue. And reheated potatoes accumulate acrylamide with each round of dry heat, a group 2A probable carcinogen with a specific mechanism in pancreatic ductal cells. In every case, the chemistry changes the second time heat touches it. Now, the question I left open: whether years of accumulated exposure can be interrupted. Research suggests that removing repeated carcinogenic dietary exposures may support the body's natural cellular repair processes, particularly in adults who make that change before symptomatic disease develops. That is not a reversal claim. It is not a promise. It is what the science, qualified honestly, currently indicates. And it is genuine reason for the kind of hope that comes from acting on information rather than waiting. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 foods surprised you most, and what specifically you are changing in your kitchen tonight. I want to know your answer, not a yes or no. If someone in your life reheats these same foods every single week and has never once been told what happens at a chemical level the second time heat touches them, send this to them. Not as an alarm, simply because they deserve to know what you now know. Next week, I am covering the 5 cooking oils generating the most damaging oxidative compounds in the arteries of adults over 60, including the one most cardiologists still describe as safe. Subscribe so that video reaches you the day it publishes. Most of your doctors have never sat with you and connected what happens in your kitchen to what I see in an operating room. That connection is real, it is documented, and you now understand it at a level most people never will. I am Dr. Jennifer Ashton. Take that knowledge into your kitchen tonight.